Hi there, and welcome back to the final session of the Northern Transport Summit. I hope you've had good discussions so far. We're going to have in this session Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester. But just before that, we're going to have upsums from the various sessions this morning, starting with Linda McCord from Transport Focus. Linda.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and delighted that we had the opportunity to talk about our great buses. At the beginning of our discussion, I set out from Transport Focus that the bus passenger priorities for people are punctual, reliable services, running more often and going to places that people want. And what we discussed in our session is that with the national bus strategy, we really have to be extremely ambitious to make sure that we are offering the excellent bus services that people expect and that people should have delivered. But there are things that we need to make sure that we work together on. So anti-congestion policies. So slower buses are unattractive and lead to a cycle of decline. So we talked about the need to work very closely together to ensure that we tackle that and make our buses even more attractive. We need a great network. So we feel, and the feeling from the session was that we don't have that in the north quite yet, and that we need, and people should expect, very high standards from our buses, because our buses are enablers for growth, for investment, for lots of different things. I talked at the beginning about how public transport offers people freedom, but actually it's good buses and good bus services that offer people that freedom for education, for jobs, for all of those things. So really one of the key points was that we have never had such a great opportunity through the National Bus Strategy we've seen in the last 15 months, and the need to work together to really be ambitious to deliver the excellent bus services that people want and deserve. And in that way, they will come back to our buses, and those who did not use them in the past will come on board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our next upsum is from Simeon Butterworth from WSP, who's going to talk about road and rail.
5 minutes and then I'm done.
Simeon.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So I chaired this session around the Road and Rail Mini Summit, and we had a great conversation with the panel around the challenging opportunities facing road and rail infrastructure and how that can support short-term economic recovery, facilitate long-term transformational growth, and do all this whilst working towards supporting the climate change agenda and decarbonising the transport network. So huge challenge, but also huge opportunity. I guess what stood out the most was the amount of consensus across such a diverse range of speakers, the importance of collaboration and not working in silos by mode or by organisation. The need to rapidly decarbonise the network now and build back greener and not rely on the projected EV uptake projections to save the day at the 11th hour. We need to be proactive. There was consensus around the need for pipeline visibility and certainty, and that whilst it's right to challenge and test plans via documents such as the pending integrated rail plan, we do need certainty in that investment if we're going to realise our growth potential across the north. So there was an acknowledgement as well that there needs to be government investment, not just in capital, but also in helping local authorities and agencies to actually develop and design smart schemes that actually meet the challenges that we face at the moment, and really a requirement around urgency around all the policy agendas that we're sat and waiting for at the moment. The MP Hugh Merriman was on the line, who chairs the Transport Select Committee, and I think some positive messages from him around how the North is ahead of the game, has got a plan, is heading in the right direction, but obviously that the government now needs to support that moving forward, which I think we would all agree with. So thank you.
Thank you. That's rather good to hear that, and to hear some optimism from Hugh Merriman. The third up-sum is from Mary Creagh from Living Streets, who's going to talk about active travel and net zero. And I must say, certainly been some controversy around this issue during lockdown. So, Mary.
Thanks very much indeed, Christian. We had a very good discussion looking at what we need to do to encourage and to build the infrastructure for cycling and walking, and to make sure that there is the investment to allow that to happen. Did it in the framework of the government's gear change document, which is setting out a £2 billion investment into cycling and walking over the next 5 years. We have had some of that money rolled out as part of the emergency measures during the COVID lockdowns, and there was some discussions about how some of the opposition to that has perhaps been stoked up, and that there's perhaps a silent majority who are in favour of that. We talked also about the fact that 25% of trips in Sheffield are under 500 metres, and this kind of default of the car, trying to get people out and just make the nudges. And there was a very good phrase, spreading the inconvenience. At the moment, our towns and cities are designed for the convenience of the driver and the inconvenience of the pedestrian and cyclist. So how do we change that hierarchy? What does government need to do? Some very good ideas from one of our presenters, Kerry McCarthy, MP, talking about a VAT cut for children's bikes. Caroline Flint suggesting that the Daily Mile should be part of the national curriculum, much closer link with active travel, with health outcomes and the mental and physical health benefits of travelling in an active way. Kerry McCarthy suggesting cycling should be on as a national curriculum subject, so the Daily Mile should be on as well. So these are really important changes that we can do to get that behaviour change. It's not enough to build the infrastructure, we also need to drive that behaviour change. Some discussion about the role of electric vehicles and decarbonisation, and some research that showed that 4 in 10 jobs in the north of England are likely to be reliant on heavy emitting industries, whereas only 1 in 10 jobs in the south are. How do we enable that just transition? And a final thought, that electric vehicles are not the answer. They don't deal with congestion. They don't deal with the user hierarchy. They don't deal with activity. And if we put all our faith into electric vehicles, we are, in the words of Claire Haig from Greener Transport Solutions, simply redecorating hell. So on that thought, I'll finish there, Christian.
Thank you very much, Mary. I think I'd love to have been in that session, because it sounds like there was a lot up my street there. I'm just going to give a very brief, because we're slightly running behind time, a brief account of the Airports and Ports mini summit. And I must say that one of the big emphases that came out of that was we absolutely must avoid the cliff edge of moving out of the pandemic situation, where we have to come gently out of the business support packages, the furloughs, and all the rest of it, and that if there is too much of a big bump, it will be a disaster. So it was pointed out that there's an awful lot of jobs that you might not think of in terms of ports and airports, not just kind of maintaining the infrastructure, but things like cruise ships. Apparently Merseyside got its first cruise ship in 18 months, and that's an important kind of contributor. Aviation is not just aeroplanes flying; it's also aviation manufacturing, which is also quite strong in this region. So quite a lot of discussion about that. A great emphasis, a positive emphasis indeed, about green issues and how the fact that really business, this was emphasized to me, that business has changed, and that, green is on everybody's agenda, and not just sort of as token greenwashing, but actually representing fundamental change about the way businesses work. And of course, it's not always easy. Steel and cement were mentioned, but there's an awful lot that can be done, particularly if the leadership comes from the boardroom. And the aspect that attracted the most attention is the Freeports initiative. And there's both positive aspects to that and kind of support for it. the idea that you want to cluster particular kind of industries into specific free ports and the like, but also concerns that it won't just displace jobs and it won't just lead to a lowering of employment standards. So, lively session, so lots of interesting points, but I won't delay any longer because our next speaker for the panel, we're going to have panel presentations, and our next speaker is Andy Burnham, who's going to talk about, and the panel is going to talk about generally kind of what the North needs in terms of transport to make it a kind of world-class transport system. Andy, over to you.
Thanks, Christian. Good afternoon, everybody. So what does the North need? A world-class transport system would be wonderful, and therefore a London-style public transport system would be wonderful. I think London is the only part of the country that has a transport system that you could say is world-class. Could probably argue that point, but I think it is an excellent system. And that is what we need. And when I say a London-style transport system, what I mean is a system that is highly integrated across all modes and a system which offers London-level fares. So to bring this right down to bread and butter issues affecting the residents of Greater Manchester, if you were to take a single bus journey in Harperhay, Greater Manchester, it costs over £4. Haringey, London, £1.55. And the question I think that all politicians need to ask themselves is, how have we allowed a situation to develop where public transport in this country is most expensive in some of the poorest parts of the country? And if we're going to level the country up, that surely has to be corrected. If you were to connect the places of Greater Manchester and our 2.8 million residents to jobs, training, opportunity through a much more affordable integrated public transport system, I think that, Christian, would be a credible plan to level up the country. It's not about picking one town or one city. It's about saying, you link cities and towns together in an integrated system that supports people's movement and, as I said, connects people to opportunity. So we think we're clear in Greater Manchester. We know what we need, and we are very much on with delivering it. So I have set out a vision for something called the B network. That is, as I say, a London-style system that will integrate bus and tram initially, but then ultimately bring in GM rail or commuter rail services so that you get that highly integrated approach. It should be based on, listening very much to Mary and agreeing with what Mary just said, it should be based on active travel. So the natural choice for the first mile and the last mile of people's journeys should be active travel. We are bringing forward a bike hire scheme in Greater Manchester this year, and that should be fully integrated into this system from a payment point of view. Important point to make, Christian, it's not just the cost of an individual journey. This London-style transport system, as delivered by the B network, needs a daily cap on what people can spend. And I think this is the game changer, actually, for how people currently move around the north compared to how people are able to move around London. So in London, of course, you can take as many buses, tubes, TfL trains as you like in any given day and only pay up to a daily cap. If you were to try to do the same in Greater Manchester, the bill would keep ratcheting up throughout a given day, because every time you switch modes, it sees a new customer, and there is no cap. And the consequence of that is it makes public transport less affordable than the car. It makes the car in many parts of not just our city region, many parts of England, the better, more affordable option than public transport. Until we turn that around, we won't be levelling up the country, but nor will we be meeting our climate obligations either. So that's our plan that we're setting out upon. I have made a mayoral decision under the Bus Services Act 2017 to bring buses under public control. That creates the conditions for integration of buses with our tram system, and that is my immediate priority right now, to create that London-style system over bus and tram, in effect to make Metrolink, the trams, one, and buses one system, one, in effect, Metrolink system over both. We are on with that, and we have a target date of 2025, although we would try and bring that forward if we can get the support that might be needed to do that. And that, in the end, I think, would give us a world-class system. Just to say something, if I can, Christian, I don't know how long you wanted me to speak for, but just to say something about intercity transport. Obviously, I'm responsible for the intracity vision, and I've just outlined that. But we do, of course, need to progress our plans alongside getting the right solution for intercity transport across the whole of the North. And Transport for the North very much our lead agency in making sure we articulate what the North needs from HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail. But this is actually a big decision that's looming that has to be got right if transport all over the North is to be got right. So currently, we have a situation where the Castlefield corridor in central Manchester is one of the few pieces of officially declared congested infrastructure in the country. And the timetable chaos that we saw in May 2018 is very much kind of traceable back to this congested infrastructure. May 2018 brought an attempt to run many more services on infrastructure that simply couldn't cope with that level of demand, and we saw the chaos that ensued. But here we are, we are 3 years on from that, and there is still no clear plan for fully sorting out that infrastructure in Greater Manchester. And at the same time, we are now being asked to accept a reduced timetable for the foreseeable future to get reliability into those services. But that is not what the North was promised by George Osborne when he came to Manchester in 2014 to declare a northern powerhouse that would have modern rail services at its heart. So that's there on the one hand. We believe in Greater Manchester we need platforms 15 and 16 at Manchester Piccadilly, which will actually then complete the vision of the Ordsall Chord and the expanded infrastructure coming through central Manchester to correct the timetable for everywhere in the North, not just for us. This isn't a selfish case I'm making. This is a case for all of the North. If services don't work in that area, you will get delays that affect everywhere. But I think also, Christian, just to finish on this point, we're kind of repeating the same mistake, potentially, with HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail. Now, we have kicked back against the idea of a surface station for HS2 at Piccadilly for a number of reasons. One being that it takes a lot of land that we would otherwise want to use for development. In London, you have to spend more money on stations because you have to dig down because there's already expensive buildings around them. If you just build a massive train station on the surface at Manchester Piccadilly, I think you take away a huge opportunity for us to make that area the heart of a revitalised North. But actually, I don't think it will work as well either, because if you look at the plans for the surface station, it's highly complicated to be bringing all of those trains into that surface station alongside Northern Powerhouse Rail services crossing over those lines. And then think of all the passenger flows in that massive Piccadilly station with people going in all kinds of different directions on a huge surface level station. We don't think it's the right solution. We believe the right solution is an underground option at Manchester Piccadilly, effectively a German-style station or a continental-style station where you have classic rail on the top, and then you go down a level to Northern Powerhouse Rail, and down another to HS2, and then to Metrolink. That is what we believe is a vision for a modern North. And I think by building HS2 I would say to save money, so to build it in a suboptimal fashion on the surface, where Northern Powerhouse Rail would become a turn-back service where you go in one way and then you come out the same way, and the driver has to walk to the other end of the train to drive those. That isn't good enough for the North, in my view. And I think it is to repeat the mistakes of history, because we're doing too much on the surface of central Manchester. That is the problem. Everything is moving on the surface, the buses, the trams, the trains, and at the end of the day, you get congestion. And I think we could be about to repeat the mistake for another century if we build all of the modern high-speed rail on the surface at Manchester Piccadilly. And we believe the time has come to separate it out and to create that underground option. If you go to any second city in the world, I know many of us feel we're the first city, but let's, for argument's sake, consider us the second city. Then you would find that in places like Lyon or Barcelona, or any other comparable city of that nature, much of the transport system would be underground. And I don't think you are going to get a world-class, just to finish, Christian, a world-class public transport system if you try and do it all on the cheap, on the surface of central Manchester. You will make a congested surface of central Manchester even more so. And that is why, together with colleagues at Transport for the North, I am saying to the government, please publish the integrated rail plan so that we can see all of this analysis laid out, and we can make our judgments about these big decisions on rail infrastructure in central Manchester informed by that analysis. So I will leave it there, Christian. I think we have a plan for world-class intra-city transport through the B network. I don't think we yet have a plan for world-class intercity transport, but I'm hoping we can work with the government to achieve one, and I will leave it there.
Okay, Andy. Look, I just want to get in a couple of questions. I know we've got some other speakers to get in, so just briefly, but there's a couple of questions, including a rather cheeky one, which I had thought of as well, which is, do you really want to be like London? Which is, but I think to some extent you do, because they have a completely different transport system and a better one. But on that, do you think it's feasible, given the white paper that has just come out, do you think it's feasible that Manchester could get hold of the local railway in the way that TfL is gradually getting hold of some of the lines? And one other question from Hugh Goulbourne is, all this is very well on cities, but what about places like Bury and Rochdale, and he says his hometown of Huddersfield? How do you improve transport there? So just a couple of quick questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Christian. No, I think London is a reasonable place for us to aim for now. We could go higher and say, well, to be honest with you, if we had an all-electric, zero-carbon bus system linked with our current Metrolink system, which is running largely on renewable energy and is highly convenient to use, actually, much more so than the tube. There is a benefit of surface travel as well, which is it's just easier and more pleasant, actually, for people to use. So you could argue that that is better than London if we get that all working together. Very attractive, modern, surface-level transport, run on renewable energy. That arguably is better than what people have in London. So that is worth saying. How do we have the capacity to run GM rail? Definitely we do. Definitely we do. The best bit of our transport system is run by Transport for Greater Manchester, the tram. And I think we would do a similarly good job if we took over GM commuter rail services. And I'm not talking there, Christian, about the pan-northern services that are coming through central Manchester. I am talking about the services that kind of come into the centre, that's from the immediate environs, the Merseyrail type services. I think we could have GM rail. And actually, if you started to link that network with the Metrolink network and think about tram train, maybe not in the next sort of decade, but certainly beyond the next decade, then I think you are laying the foundation for a system that can continue to improve over time. Absolutely 100% devolution of rail stations. 60% of them are not step-free access in Greater Manchester. And at the current rate of change, I'm told that we will only get all of our stations accessible to all of our citizens by 2070. Now, I ask you this, and I ask the rail industry this in all seriousness. If we said to another group of citizens with protected characteristics under the Equality Act that they couldn't use a critical public service for another 50 years, the outcry would be massive. But why isn't it as massive about this? This is completely wrong. And I believe stations are community infrastructure as opposed to rail infrastructure. I believe they are neglected at the moment, but they are also inaccessible, as I said. And yes, if you were to devolve those stations to Greater Manchester, I think you would see much quicker improvements in terms of accessibility, but also in the basic use of the stations and the standard. And you would see more regeneration around those stations as well. Quickly to pick up Hugh's point, that's the whole point, Hugh, about our vision in the B network. It does link Bury and Rochdale to Manchester, and it levels up everywhere together. That's the whole point of this. You make it much more affordable for people to travel from Rochdale into Manchester. You connect people to opportunity, but also you help regenerate those places. I'll give you an example. Middleton. I'm looking now at extending Metrolink to Middleton in the borough of Rochdale. That is a vision about using transport to then bring town centre regeneration. So I think all of this does fit together. It's not a choice of towns versus cities. I think the government are kind of almost creating that dynamic. I think we shouldn't go down there. You can lift towns and cities together, in my view.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I'll pass on to the other panel members now, asking the same question about how do you create a world-class transport system for the North, starting with Emma Degg, who's the Chief Executive of the Northwest Business Leadership Team. Emma.
Okay, I'm probably going to echo a number of things that Andy just said better than I could. So very quickly, we know what the economic case is for sorting this out. Transport for the North did a brilliant job with the Independent Economic Review. We know that as a country, we are rubbish at choosing a plan and sticking to it and delivering on big infrastructure projects. And we mustn't make that mistake now. And there's lots of voices, particularly when it comes to intercity transport, suggesting that COVID has changed everything. And I suggest that that's just not the case. This year might have seemed like 10 years, but actually, given we're still travelling on a Victorian infrastructure system, it really is just the blink of an eye, is it not? Business wants to see investment, but actually we need plans that are stuck to, because otherwise all of those other benefits that would come from Northern Powerhouse Rail and HS2 and the other important projects, there simply won't be the time to plan for. So what are we going to do about apprenticeships? How do we make sure that we're linking properly into the skills system? How can businesses move resourcing around? What we hate is stop, start, stop, start. It's a disincentive to investment. Next, in terms of COVID, it is too premature to suggest that this is the end of the commute. We know that many businesses are looking at staff continuing to work from home, but actually for all of them, largely, there'll be a proportion of time spent in the office. And if we don't have the right transport system, then that's just going to be more car journeys on the road. And we've started seeing that already as lockdown lifts. And finally, we can't do it on the cheap. And that's Andy's point. And it's not just about Manchester, as important as that is. It's about learning the lessons that if we try and patch up ageing infrastructure, we end up with a suboptimal solution that we're just going to have to keep returning to. And furthermore, a load of disruption on the network that's a major cost to our economy while it's going on. So, plan, stick to it. Don't try and do it cheaply. And let's try and do something that's fit for the next 100 years.
Sorry, I was on mute. The old trick. Simeon, over to you. Sorry.
It's quite all right. So good afternoon, everybody. I mean, again, I think I'll probably repeat a number of points that have already been been touched on. I'll try and keep it to 3 quick points. I think, as well as the level of funding, which has been touched on, I think it's the certainty of that funding and that it's sustained and at scale. I think that supply chains need certainty, investors want certainty. So in order to deliver that world-class transport system, I do feel that it's not just the level of funding, it's that it's gained and there's the confidence there that it's going to remain there. And I think the Integrated Rail Report is an interesting test of that, which hopefully will be released shortly. The other point I was going to touch on, or the second point, was around the first mile, last mile side of things, and the need for things to be better connected and integrated. It was touched on by Andy, and I think a good example of that is what's going on at Stockport Interchange at the moment, where the WSTP team is involved in supporting all the interested parties there, bringing everybody together to collaborate and integrate the road, rail, active travel network, Metrolink services, but also importantly to have a strong link to place with residential and commercial developments on site as well. So I think that going forward is more of those mobility hubs that are also helping support better first and last mile connectivity. And the last point is something that I'm really passionate about, is it's the Building Back Greener agenda, a more carbon friendly network. But we're only going to do that if we bring the carbon agenda forward in the project life cycle in line with PAS 2080 guidance. It needs to be embedded in everything that we do from design before the design process starts, through concept right the way then through to operation and maintenance. If we're going to have any chance of delivering on what are quite ambitious net zero targets at a city level, and I think a key part of that is training and upskilling our industry to have a more carbon conscious culture, similar to how the industry has approached the safety culture over the last 20 years. And I'll end on that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to remind everybody, do post any. I've got a few questions in the chat, but we've got 15 minutes left, so do pose any questions to any or all the panelists as soon as possible. Mary of Living Streets, your thoughts? Sorry, I've been asked to go for Linda next rather than Mary. So Linda McCord, are you? Can you
yes.
Give your thoughts? Thanks, Linda. Sorry. Thanks.
Thank you very much. What I think fundamentally needs to change is the customer experience. And really, that has to be better. Gone are the days when we as passengers will tolerate poor experience. And I think what we've experienced in the last 15 months has in many ways changed people's thinking about what we can do. Some of the commuter market may have escaped and found different ways of doing things. And if as an industry we want to get people back onto our wonderful buses and trains on public transport, then we have to show people that actually our buses, our trains are absolutely great and that people can totally rely on them. Memory is long, people. It was already mentioned, the 2018-19 timetable change. People want punctual, reliable services that each and every time they choose to travel that way, they will get where they need to go. But also, it is very much about that choice. We are about moving people, and people will move in the way they want to, and they should have the choice of an excellent service, whichever way they choose to do that. And finally, the really key thing is to keep asking people what they want. Ask them what they want out of our public services, out of our roads, and indeed how they travel in general, and keep reviewing that we are delivering what people want. Thank you.
Okay, great. I've got a question for Andy Burnham, which is very pertinent, from Steve Walker, who says, we know subsidy in London stretches to around 700 million a year. Indeed, I somewhat suspect it's been rather more in the recent year. And I just wonder, he wonders, what kind of level of subsidy do you need to bring up to really manage to the same sort of standard?
Well, thanks, Steve. It is the case that I believe we are going to need subsidy, proportionate, I guess, compared to the size of our system and the number of residents. But we are going to need subsidy if we want to level up transport in this country. I keep coming back to that, in my view, unanswerable point. How can we justify a single bus fare costing so much more in the north of England than it does in London? When buses were deregulated, we were promised that deregulation would bring fares down, but clearly the complete opposite has happened. So the government is going to have to accept that there is a need for ongoing revenue subsidy beyond the fairly meagre bits we get through the bus services operators grant and other things at the moment that is going to be needed on an ongoing basis. Now, I would say we will need tens of millions of pounds and a high number if we are to have fairness and if we are to get a public transport system where it does cost £1.55 to catch a bus. But if it's the government that has said it wants to level up, I think the danger at the moment, Christian, is levelling up is a sort of slogan in search of meaning. Well, I think our B network plan gives it meaning. It really does give it meaning. If you were to build that kind of London-style system across a city like Greater Manchester, you will level the place up because you will connect people much more. You will connect them to opportunity. You will lay the foundations for a more productive economy than we currently have. So that would be my answer, Steve. I'm talking, high 80, 90, that level million revenue subsidy. And obviously we haven't got an agreement from the government about what exactly they think they can contribute. They are currently subsidising public transport outside of London to a higher degree than they've ever done before because of COVID. So they're currently subsidising tram and bus. I think the discussion with them has got to be, they've got to leave a significant chunk of that subsidy permanently in our system. And I think that is the minimum that people in the north of England deserve.
Yes, I think one of the problems with transport is that it's always talked about in terms of subsidy. And if there was a wider understanding of economics and the concept of externalities, we wouldn't talk about subsidy, we'd talk about investment. And, I think that's something that we really ought to, those of us who work in the transport industry ought to move towards, is always talking about investment because, we all know that, every pound we put into transport, it generates, far more in terms of externalities. And so that's something we ought to stress. While you're on, Andy, one last question, but it is to all the panel in a way. You talked about London, being sort of emblematic and somewhere you'd like to imitate. But are there other places in the world? What does world class look like? What are there other places that maybe you've been to or looked at or heard about that we could learn from?
I've mentioned Lyon before, Christian, and I certainly felt that was one of the best systems that I've ever seen. The degree of integration across kind of everything really was amazing to see. A fully developed underground system, a fantastic public transport system. If you want to pick up Mary's agenda more and think of active travel, you would go to Scandinavia or parts of the Netherlands, wouldn't you, where there's just been a very different mentality around active travel. I mentioned Germany before in terms of the infrastructure and the way in which you make infrastructure as user-friendly as possible, with those attractive multi-layered stations. I think we know what good looks like. And as I mentioned, London is world class. It is in places, not everywhere, but it does have elements of world class transport. But if you could give me Lyon's public transport system, I would have it in a heartbeat. And I think that I spent an afternoon going around it with the company that operates Metrolink, Keolis, and I, can only say to you that I'm just incredibly jealous of what I saw, and it's. Just to very briefly, I know you want to bring other panelists in, just to pick up your point. Thinking about transport in the UK has to change massively, in my view. It isn't just that we don't make the bigger case about investment in transport and all the wider societal benefits and environmental benefits that brings. What I notice is we are trapped in a very siloed policy debate about each mode individually. And actually, there is no thinking about integration. It doesn't come through at the national level because of the way the DfT is constructed. It is rigidly thinking about the different modes. And it's left to us on the ground to try and break down the silos and join up the dots. And transport does have to change very much in thinking about integration, the user, and how the user experiences. I think this point was being made by Linda, I think, how the user experiences transport. And then beyond that, as you say, how transport contributes to a more productive economy, a cleaner, a greener society. And mayors all over the world tell me that they are working with their governments to bring right down the cost of public transport. You're seeing it in cities everywhere, even made free in some places. And we are very much out of step, I think, in trying to run all of this commercially. It hasn't worked. Rail fares have gone up, bus fares have gone up when you try and run a model in that way. You want it all under public control, and you want it all able to be highly integrated and the cost of it brought down. That is a 21st century vision for public transport in the north of England.
Okay, thank you very much, Andy. I'm afraid I think we've now running out of time, and we need to go to our last speakers. But thank you, Andy. My vision for the North has always been what you want is. I mean, I'm writing a book about British Rail at the moment, and Network South East was like a fantastic kind of example of how you got, together with the travel card, how you got an integrated system. Publicly run, very commercially minded, made great use of kind of off-peak fares. And you need something like that for the North. If you had kind of fast electric trains running between all your major towns and cities of the North, all marked as transport for the North, I think it would give you the world-class system that you need. And I hope you work
just to say on that, Christian, if you don't mind, very lastly, fully agree with what you just said. My experience in these last 4 years, even in the context, firstly, a northern powerhouse in the previous government and now levelling up under the current government, it is still the case that they're trying to pare back electrification in the north, that they don't want to make Transpennine upgrade freight compatible, that they want to build Manchester Piccadilly all on the surface, but they don't want to build platforms 15 and 16. It is still the case that the North is getting a sort of the point is often made by Sir Richard Lees. Billions were spent tunnelling HS2 under the Chilterns for zero economic gain, but they won't spend money in the North to tunnel HS2 under Manchester for major economic gain in terms of preserving, our land, our prime real estate. And that thinking is, as I'm afraid, still ingrained, and the Green Book mentality around all of that, it's still ingrained. And we still get to the point where when it gets to the North, things have to be chopped and cut. And until we change that, we won't be in the real business of Northern Powerhouse or levelling up. But we should be getting the first call on investment rather than always having to make the savings for money that's been spent down south. So there we go. Controversial note on which to end. But thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, very good point, Andy. Obviously said with passion. And clearly you need to move Manchester to the Chilterns, and then you'll manage to get it underground. But thanks a lot, Andy. That's been absolutely fascinating. And we'll move straight on to David Sidebottom, who's the Director of Transport Focus, to do one of the winding up chats. Sorry, I'm slightly running over, David. Over to you.
No, thank you, Christian. I'll try and keep it brief. I started this session back in 10 o'clock with a few opening comments, so if I reflect very briefly on those and just kind of where we've got to today, I think when I sat down with colleagues at Transport for the North and Devo Connect and kind of planning this session, I mean, it seems to have started and probably 18 months or so ago, but we've always tried to find the right time to do it. And I think this has been the great time to do it. You know, we've got the William Schatz Review, we've got National Bus Strategy, we've got Building Back Better, we've got decarbonisation. There's a lot of buzzwords been around today, which is absolutely right, and setting the ambition for the North. And just picking up what Andy said there about joining things up, it's not the classic transport conference today where we're just joining up the modes. It seems to go beyond that. It's about joining up the North. And I think given the ambition that's been set out today, as someone sat here in Stockport who is looking to be part of that ambition, it's really encouraging. And I think what we've got to do, from going back to my roots as a transport user advocate, is to make sure that we bring our people with us, because people, as my colleague Linda said earlier, do have long memories. And if you were a rail commuter 3 years ago, while that may seem a long time ago, as people come back to using rail in greater numbers, which is great to see. We're just about to start work on the Transpennine route upgrade. So we're going to make sure we bring people with us as we rebuild that railway around them and they're making their daily journeys. But the ambition's been great today. It's fantastic to see, and to make sure that we keep focusing on those things that matter most to the travelling public. Thanks, Christian.
Thank you, David. And the last word is with Tim Foster of Transport for the North. Well introduced there. So, Tim.
Thanks ever so much. Fantastic to have the last word at the end of what's been quite an amazing day. And I won't add too much more, actually. I think what you've heard throughout the day is real consensus, actually, right across the North about what's needed, both in terms of the kind of vision for the public transport networks that the Mayor's outlined, the connectivity between places, to really drive growth and open up access to opportunities right across the North. And of course, the now urgent need to rebuild confidence in public services, particularly on rail and buses over the next year following the pandemic. So I wouldn't repeat any of that. I'd say, despite how much has changed over the last 12 to 18 months, actually that original vision of One North and the Northern Transport Strategy back in 2014, 2015 is still absolutely there. And I think that consensus about what we need and how to get there is something we see at every single TfN board meeting when Northern leaders from right across the North come together. And so that single vision, that single sense of purpose is absolutely there. And I think that's everything you've heard today. In terms of where next, William's publication of the William Schatz Review was a big step forward, and the board will have the opportunity to discuss and respond to that in early June. As everybody has said, we now urgently need the integrated rail plan to be published for all the reasons actually that Emma set out in terms of certainty. And I think the only thing I'm going to end with is an autumn spending review. So government has said there's going to be a spending review in the autumn. We don't know much about what it's going to look like or when it's going to happen. Clearly, it's going to be shaped by what happens with wider events over the coming months. But the spending review in the autumn is a real place to test out everything that's just been said about reframing transport as an investment, not a subsidy, both on services and infrastructure. We were really pleased, and I know lots of people were really pleased with the new Green Book that came out end of last year. But I couldn't agree more with Andy Burnham that we're still waiting to see that Green Book and the opportunity to really join up transport with other things and really think about the investment proposition on infrastructure, really translate now through into decision-making and commitment from government. So I'll leave it there and hand back to you, Christian.
Thank you very much. Well, I've only got a couple of minutes for my closing remarks. I could go on for much longer, but I just want to make a couple of clear points that come out from the discussions that I've been involved in. But first of all, we'll still need transport, right? And we'll still need good transport. And yes, of course, there is reduced demand, and there might be reduced demand for some time to come. but that doesn't make the transport system any less essential. It ties in with the green agenda. We've got to get the right sort of transport back, and if we don't kind of provide a good service, then we will get the situation where just more people are using cars, and that is something that nobody at this conference wants. And the second part of that is integration. I mean, it's so there is an opportunity now. That there is a lot of change in government, both on terms of the buses and the railways, and there is a recognition that integration has never really happened in this country. I mean, I wrote a little book called Are Trams Socialist? The answer is no, by the way, a couple of years ago, about the fact that we've never had anything like an integrated transport policy in this country. And much of what came up today was how we desperately need that. And, certainly in terms of regional policy, absolutely is essential. And the third part of just what I want to sum up quickly is that investment is still essential. And again, we mustn't allow the fact that there has been a blip in terms of transport demand, not to look at the major investment schemes like sorting out the crowding in Manchester Piccadilly and spending a bit of extra money, as Andy Burnham said, putting HS2 platforms below surface and not on the ground, so that they take up a lot of very valuable real estate in the heart of Manchester, and so on. So investment, integration, and the need for transport, I would take as the three takeaways. So thank you very much for attending. Obviously, we apologise that this has had to be virtual. I think I only got shouted at once for having failed to unmute my microphone, and most people managed to unmute theirs. We've learned something over the last year, that you must unmute your microphones. And next year, hopefully, there will be, there is the Northern Transport Summit will be next year. I'm optimistic in this. It will definitely not be virtual. It will be real. And hopefully we'll see all of you in person at the conference next year. So thank you very much for attending. Thank you in particular to the speakers and the panelists in this session, and particularly to Andy Burnham for taking time away from his very busy schedule to address it. So thank you very much, and let's see you all in person next year.